Hello there guys, it's Mike with the Fish Tank Barn. I'd like to welcome you guys back to another video. If you're looking to amplify your aquarium experience, go ahead and smash the subscribe button, ding the notification bell so you don't miss any updates here on the channel. So today we're finishing up the MBI conference. We're here at the barbecue, and I've got an opportunity here to interview kind of one of my mentors in the hobby. So I'd like to introduce to you Matt Patterson, and then let him go ahead and explain a little bit about his origin story, how he got started in the hobby, and we'll just kind of take it from there.
All right, so Matt Patterson, as Mike said, and I've known Mike for over a decade. My origin story. I got my first aquarium when I was 5 years old. It was a Christmas present, 10-gallon tank, and then by the age of 10, that 10-gallon tank had turned into a saltwater tank. I started working the aquarium trade when I was 14. The moment I could actually get a real job, I went out and walked into a pet store that had a saltwater aquarium section that was empty. And I said, you know, hey, are you hiring? And not really. I said, well, tell you what, if I get this system working, will you give me a job? And the owner said, yeah. And I spent a weekend there, got the whole system up and running, and worked there. And all through high school, worked in the aquarium trade. Went to Eckerd briefly for marine bio, didn't really mesh well. And yeah, in and out of the aquarium trade, ran a wholesaler for a while, did a little importing. So kind of bounced around, and professionally, my training is actually in multimedia communications and computer software development. Kind of went in a different career track than what I thought I would do, but at this point I'm the executive, senior editor for Koralle magazine and Amazonas magazine, publishing partner in Amazonas magazine. And so yeah, it's kind of one of those stories of kind of going everywhere and winding up in a place you don't expect. But
very cool. That's definitely a pretty interesting path. One of the things I did notice, kind of reading your bio, going way back into the history a little bit, was you did a lot of work with African cichlids.
I did.
And you kind of ran a African cichlid breeding setup. So how did that, explain a little bit about that, and then how it set you up for success going on with breeding some of the other fish that you've been breeding now in the saltwater world.
Okay, so the cichlid factory was run by John Baker. It was a large basement operation, and he brought me on after I left my last retail position. Said, hey, you want to wholesale fish? And so it started, go around and was repping his fish and helping him out running the room, and then we started breeding fish there. And along the way, I've written the cichlid recipe, which you brought up, which is now very antiquated, but it was a handbook that went with Pablo Tiput's pictorial books. You know, they're beautiful books. We used to take people over to the tank in the store and say, okay, so these are all Lunicara peacocks, and yeah, they look brown now, but here, just open up the book and start, this is what it's going to turn into. And it's not going to cost you $100 to get this fish because you're going to buy it when it's young. And but I sold a lot of them, a lot of Tiput's books, but they didn't have any husbandry information or care information. So I came up with this about 8-page printed handbook that explained it all and kind of looked at all the cichlids by genus, because you can, for the most part, say most Copodicromis are going to be similar in husbandry. Most Pseudotropheus will be, you know, all tropheus are going to be basically the same. And,
almost like tangs in the saltwater.
Yeah, I mean, just really all fish kind of follow, mostly, not always, but right. I feel like if you kind of know what genus you're working with, you have a good idea. Not always, but
absolutely.
So it was a very broad overview, and then we turned it into a website. It's way outdated now.
But it's still great information. I mean, I'll put it in the description if you guys want to check it out. Like Matt said, it is a little bit dated.
A little bit dated is I wrote it in 1994 and haven't updated it. So.
Right, no, right, but there's still some really good information in there to check out. I mean, it's still, you know, like I said, the species names may have changed just from entomology, et cetera, but it's still great information. So with that being said, what are your current projects you've been working on now in terms of the saltwater breeding side of it? I know that you're pretty big now into the saltwater breeding. You know, we've talked a lot in the past MBIs.
Yeah. Right? Oh, that's something in the background. It's a barbecue, folks. So you know.
Yeah, it's a barbecue. So we've been talking about the you know, past MBIs. You know, the first MBI was literally, you know, for saltwater guys building a fish room. I remember the first talk, watching Matt talk about building a fish room. And then from there, you know, we've talked about breeding the orange spot filefish, talked about various other projects he's been working on as well, from the lightning maroon, etc. So give me a little bit of history, I guess, I guess a little bit of history on your saltwater breeding side. We've talked a lot about it in MBIs, but the audience may not know about those.
So I started breeding marine fish, I want to say about 2006, maybe 2005. In my small condo in Chicago, I had like 100 gallons and just a couple nanocubes and a couple 10s, and everything was done in my office, and then in the bedroom, like, you know, it was well, different kind of breeding, but so it was just this thing where I worked with what I had, and I crammed the fish in way more than people would ever have recommended, but I was already an experienced aquarist. I knew what I was doing, and you know, all the fish are spawning. We had, at one point, I had a 24-gallon reef aquarium, and I had 6 different species of fish spawning in that tank, and it was like this, well, which one do I want to try to rear now? I think the big change for me was this realization that when I worked in the retail trade, you know, 20 some odd years ago, you would never have told someone, oh yeah, you can put two pygmy angelfish in the same tank. That was a death sentence. They're going to kill each other. Don't do it. Well, I had 4 centipede argy in my 24-gallon tank, and they're all the males swimming around and spawning with all the different females. I think we learned a lot more about the natural life histories of these fish, and started to unravel the secrets of their social behavior and their social constructs, and realized, yeah, we can spawn these fish, and a lot of them were spawning in people's tanks.
And they're not knowing it.
They didn't even know
because
what was
it's at
going
night.
on.
They're not up. They're not around. It's nighttime. The tank goes dark. The fish, you know, they're pelagic spawners. They go up and spawn, and no one really knows. You know, you have to pay attention to really know what's going on. I've had angelfish spawn, and I just never knew it. Like one day, I just happened to catch it.
So
you know?
the first marine fish I successfully reared was the green-banded goby. I can't, Tiger gobiops now, multifasciata, I believe, but
okay.
Little tiny fish this big, beautiful. It's a hermaphrodite, so if you get them young, any two you put together, you'll wind up with a pair. And the reason I knew they were breeding was because I was sitting at my desk typing away at my computer, and I noticed all the fish started eating. What? I didn't feed the tank, and I look over, and they're picking off the baby gobies that are hatching, and the male's going into his cave, coming back with a mouthful of babies and spitting them out, and all the fish are gobbling them up. And I ended up figuring out what was going on in future batches.
Almost like a mouth-breathing cichlid in a way.
A little bit, you know, but you know, there's hundreds of babies, and all the fish are just, and it happens, the same thing with pelagic spawners. Hey, it's evening, and all of a sudden all the fish are eating, and no one fed the tank, and you know, it's so, I spawned and reared a number of fish in that setting, and then moved to Duluth, Minnesota. I was in Chicago, moved to Duluth to be closer to my wife's family, and have a much larger fish from there now. Worked with the lightning maroon clownfish, which was a genetic aberration that was found in Papua New Guinea, and was the second one found. And other than a single gene, it's basically just a maroon clownfish, but very striking mutation. The pattern looks like lightning bolts trickling down the fish. And
absolutely. I mean, if you have a chance to read that story, it's an amazing story. I mean, Matt went through a lot to get that fish to spawn, and you know, and he's the reason we have that fish today.
I remember people telling me, and I won't name names, but a few people who looked at that project years later and said, we just assumed that fish wasn't going to live for you. And yeah, it was touch and go a couple times where, yeah, it was the most expensive fish I'd ever purchased on an order of magnitude that I never would have. But I was given the opportunity, and I talked to my wife and said, what do you think about this? We could spend this money and it could die, it could arrive dead, and I'm not going to get anything out of it. And it could not be genetic, and it's just a one-off fish, and that's it. And she took a leap of faith with me and kind of said, well, you know more about the fish than I do. You're not gonna, it's not an obscene amount of money, so if you want to do it,
go have at it. So that's why we have it today, is he bred it, it's out there now in the hobby, so it's definitely something that's very, read that story is all I'm gonna have to say, because I mean, he went through a lot. It was going to fish vets at one point, getting involved in treating disease. Yep. I mean, how many years did it take? 2 to 3?
No, it was only, I think, 2.
Was it 2?
It took about 2 to get that fish to spawn, and then right away we got lucky. The gene was, it appears to be dominant, so yeah, a lot of the offspring had it, and
cool.
Yeah, so we got a little lucky there.
Cool.
It could have been recessive, and it would have taken a lot longer.
Taking a lot longer to get it out, yeah. Definitely. So Matt, you've been doing a little bit of work with the clownfish, different variants, kind of like guppies, where you have the different strains going on, especially with like the Ocellaris, the Percula, some of the Clarkies now as well, and some Bisinctus, etc. So kind of tell me a little bit about that project and how that's been kind of How you been working on that?
So we kind of had this wild west of what I call the guppification of clownfish. They are the saltwater aquarium hobby's guppy because we've really gotten to a point with clownfish breeding that you can just talk to Reed Mariculture, get your algae pastes and your roticulture and your TDO, and you got all the feeds you need to rear a clownfish. And you can find spawning pairs of clownfish that people are just getting rid of out of their tanks. If you find mature clownfish, there'll be mature females. You can put a small male with them, so pairing the fish is probably easier than most freshwater fish that you want to try to breed, except maybe like live bearers. But so what happened with that is kind of ended up being this wild west of we'll just slap a name on it and call it something new, even if it already had a name. And so I worked to basically kind of weed through all the BS, figure out, came from my time breeding freshwater angelfish, learning how like the Angelfish Society had codified much of the genetics and taken the time to scientifically prove out what things are and kind of came up with, hey, there's a lot of good information here. And then my time as an orchid breeder really informed my views on hybridization and how it's not necessarily a bad thing. And we kind of looked at the clownfish world, which is both genetic variants and hybridization, kind of meshed the two together, and came back, and a few years ago I came up with a large presentation. Here's all the clownfish varieties, the species, the genetic variations, and the hybrids. And having a unified name and kind of trying to get people to understand, if you create something new, that's fine, and you absolutely have the right to name it, and we should all respect that name and use that name, because then the name means something and we know what it is we're getting.
Kind of like Stan Schubel with guppies.
Oh yeah. So that was that project, and I still maintain that list. And when something new comes out, I tend to try to at least get a blog post nailing down the information, putting it down in writing, whether it's in Coral magazine or in a blog post, somewhere that information's out there, and then I still maintain the presentations. They're freely available. I can post the links for you guys. But once that reference is there, we can all get on the same page. Instead of breeding to just, we'll slap a new name on it. It's Mike's Flamin' Hot Lips Clownfish,
right?
It's a Picasso, and we breed for quality instead of just new or a name or a fad. We all know it's a Picasso clownfish. What's going to be the best Picasso clownfish?
Right.
And I feel that the whole naming thing, when people weren't being respectful, it was just.
It was marketing.
They were putting out, well, it was marketing, but it wasn't even honest. Right. That's really what it wasn't transparent, and people were being taken advantage of. So that was where that project came from, was just, and then realizing too, from my African cichlid background, the tremendous natural biogeographic diversity of clownfish. We have like 18 varieties of Clarkie clownfish. I think at least a few of them are not Clarkie. They're probably worthy of species recognition. So we have over, probably conservatively, I'd say 60 actual varieties of clownfish that come from the wild, and knowing how each reef in Lake Malawi is going to have a different population of fish, they're slightly different. African cichlid hobbyists understood that and care about that because they were given that knowledge by people like Ad Konings and others who were going out there and saying, here's what's here. So I kind of did the same thing, built on other people's work, and published the first kind of, here's what we know, what we think we know. There's five varieties of Amphiprion chrysopterus, the blue stripe. Some of them are very separated from others, and probably with some genetic analysis might be a different species. And so just making people aware of our natural biodiversity, that was another big part of it. It's a shame to have that there. No one knows about it. Everyone's excited about a Picasso or a snowflake or a frostbite.
Right, exactly. And it's kind of funny if you get I'll post a link to the name of the book in the description. But it's basically Gerald Allen, and I think it's the field guide basically for clownfish. And there's a key in there to tell which fish they are, because some of them are not easy once you start to get into kind of the brown clownfish realm. And so if you go through the dichotomous key in there, you can actually figure out which fish it is, and then you can keep that biodiversity going.
Yeah, and that's just a start.
Right.
He only has like the 28 recognized species,
right?
26 recognized species, and there are fish that have been in the trade under 3 different names.
Right, Seabass and Clarkies, for example, you cannot tell which one's which.
Well, you can if you know.
If you know, but it's hard. It's hard to do if you don't know. If you don't know and you walk into the store The stores, like in freshwater, for example, there's standards for fish, and people respect the locations, especially if you're getting into killifish, gadids, things like that. The locations are really important. The saltwater hobby isn't there yet. Can I kind of follow up a little bit? We did have a little brief discussion yesterday about the kind of standards for saltwater fish. I mean, I guess, we can kind of agree that the hobby's not there yet,
no.
But at some point it probably should, I guess, get there. Or does it need to? That's
up to breeders.
Yeah.
I mean, that's up to ornamental breeders and how far they want to push it and what they will all agree to and support. It's a communal ethic. The orchid world has a 100-year record of keeping a hybrid registry, and names matter, and if you lose the tag on the plant, it's a worthless plant, throw it out. Even if you think you know what it is, you don't know what it is. That's a communal ethic, and that only comes through time and everyone agreeing to adhere to that.
Absolutely.
And there's always going to be someone who doesn't. So clownfish breeding is too new and too much of a fad to kind of see where that's going to end up.
Right, that was something that opened my eyes as I've done more freshwater. The real importance on keeping the, I had heard it from Matt before in my salt, when I was just doing saltwater. But as I was going through the freshwater stuff, it's it's real important to keep that strain of guppies with that strain of guppies only, and don't put it with anything else.
Unless you're trying to create a new strain and working on that on a project.
Exactly. Or I'll give an example of the gadids I work with. Those do not go with anything else. Those are in their own tank, covered, no central system. They're in their own thing, and that's how they work. So after yesterday's MBI, the last talk of the day, Matt closed it out with talk about the orange spot filefish, which he was the first person to breed that fish. Tell us a little bit about the orange spot filefish, your experience with that fish, and then how that led into your work now with some of the coralivore butterfly fish.
Okay, so I like challenging fish. We'll start there. I when I was trying to breed fish, one of the fish I tried to breed was the mandarin dragonet. I've spawned the greens, the spotteds, scooter blennies, red scooter blennies, which are not blennies, of course. But along that way, there's a lady in Germany, Iris Bunik, who bred the bristletail filefish. It's a filefish, which is a relative of the triggerfish. Nothing like that had ever been bred in captivity. And I was excited, like, wow, this is cool. And so I instantly, it's the Aptasia-eating filefish, Acrichthys tomentosus. I went out looking for them, was looking for them for weeks at the local stores, couldn't find them. They weren't really in the trade in the US yet. The Germans had realized, and Europeans had realized, oh, well, they'll eat Aptasia, this is a beneficial fish. And so they were starting to bring them in, but the American hobbyists really hadn't caught on to that yet. And while I was out looking, I stumbled across a pair of orange spotted, or what I prefer to call harlequin filefish. And so while I was out looking for those fish, I stumbled upon a pair of what people call orange spotted or harlequin filefish, which is an obligate coralivore. So in the wild, it only eats live coral. And I kind of was hesitant, but I'd had success with other difficult fish, and I decided, hey, I'll give these a try. Cut a long story short, gave them a try, started getting more of them, and before you know it, I had figured out how to keep them alive, and that was already a big feat. I'm not gonna lie, I felt really good about that.
Absolutely.
And then I want to say 6 months had passed, and all of a sudden I realized they're starting to court, and the next thing you know, they're spawning, and I had already reared several fish at that point, and that's the first time I had reared something that no one else on the planet had done, which was kind of like that was a boyhood goal. It was one of the things I thought I might want to accomplish in my life, was to do something that literally no one else had done. And so I was literally jumping up and down, calling Joe Lichtenberg, like, oh my God, you won't believe what just happened. They laid eggs, this is fantastic. And only Joe Lichtenberg, who is a master clownfish breeder and had been doing so for 20 years, this was the guy I knew who, when I was a teenager, they're like, oh, there's this guy over in Schaumburg, Illinois, who's breeding clownfish in his basement.
He's like one of the only 5 people doing it.
Yeah, and and of course, here all these years later, this is probably 10 years ago, so I'm in my 30s now, and I'm friends with him, and I'm calling him like, you won't believe what just happened, and very few people even can understand that feeling. But yeah, cutting a really long story short, I was successfully bred them, replicated it a couple times, and then when I moved to Duluth again, you change priorities, you have kids. I worked with the related species. I kind of said, okay, I did that. I had some good success and promising results for the future. I'm going to try the other related species, the Red Sea harlequin filefish or orange spotted. So it just doesn't have a long nose. It's the only difference. And I didn't have as good a luck with those. They're much more expensive and they're really hard to find. If I ever have the opportunity to get them again, I'll probably try again. But more recently, that success with those coralivores, those oblate coralivores, I've also been a lifelong fan of butterfly fish. I remember being a kid, I sketched out the outline of a 30-gallon long, because that was the tank I was getting, and I drew all the butterfly fish that I wanted to keep in the community butterfly fish tank. And I remember reading my Burgess Atlas and memorizing the names of all the Chaetodons, and they're all still in here. Oh, that's Chaetodon declevis, that one's Flavicoronatus, that one's Tinkeri, that one's, they're all stuck in here. So having that passion for difficult fish that a lot of people say you can't keep or you can't keep well, having that excitement for trying something no one's done before. The past couple of years I've been working on keeping coralivore butterflies alive. And I feel like we've gotten to a point where maybe we have a good starting point for how to keep them alive. I have a few that I've had for a couple of years now. It's all my work has been documented. I presented it at MASNA last year, and then in Coral Magazine. So it's like, it's on the edge. It's not for everyone. It's risky. You're going to lose fish, kind of thing. But discus used to be hard to keep alive. Angelfish used to be really hard to keep alive. These things we figure out.
It's about, I think the saltwater hobby is about 30 years behind or so.
That's fair. I'd say it's a totally fair assessment to say we're 30 years behind.
Right, so 30 years from now, we'll be keeping all the butterfly fish and it'll be easy to keep. People are spawning them. I mean, like I have discus in my super hard Michigan African cichlid water and they do just fine.
Yeah, it's that's where we're at. That's a good way of putting it.
Yeah, that's where we're at.
So at this point, I feel like I may have noticed some preliminary courtship between a pair that I have. But I've not been bothering to breed fish lately because it's just been, I'm trying to keep them alive, which is kind of a cop-out, like, oh, you should still be breeding something, but no, my life is busy.
And it's a lot of work for the freshwater people in my audience. It's a little bit different than breeding a lot of the biggest one I can compare it to, I would say, is maybe breeding like rainbow fish. It's, and times about 3 or 4. With all of the, the rotifers you have to get, or the copepods you have to culture, and you have to create the entire ecosystem in order to get that fish to survive. And we have to understand what it eats, understand the water parameters, understand any sort of bacterial issues, fungal issues,
we were talking
etc.
last night around the table, like why aren't more people breeding marine fish? And it's just because it's really hard. And there is a level of extra effort you have to put in to grow not only phytoplankton but all the zooplankton that you need, and I don't want to do it. And I'm not gonna rear my copepods until I have spawning butterflies. It's kind of I don't have to rear live food, so I haven't wasted 2 or 3 years of my life rearing Tiiso and Parvicolanus because I don't need them yet.
Right, because all you're gonna do is feed them to your reef tank or feed them to something else.
But when the time comes, meanwhile, people are working on that, so I'm focused from a breeder's perspective. I chose a really hard project. I may never succeed. But like I said, it sounds like a cop-out, but no, really, I want to do these. There have been 3 or 4 butterfly fish species that have been spawned in captivity now. One of those people is Javier Montalvo, who oftentimes is sitting right here at this barbecue.
Absolutely.
I have the buddy who I could say, okay, so I've got babies, now what do I need to do? I've got eggs, they're doing it, now it's time to coach me on the next part. And in the meantime, other people here are working on getting better rearing copepods, coming up with better ways of rearing phytoplankton because the copepods require live phytoplankton.
Absolutely.
So all these puzzle pieces are happening, and I chose to focus on the broodstock side of my project right now. And so I have 3 coralivores that are established. They like to kill each other, which is another fun part of, you're already dealing with a fish that's hard to keep alive and disease prone, but I will then be able to share that, here's what's working, and get someone else to come back.
Absolutely.
And then, so someone else can keep a coralivore alive. That's a huge step right there.
So with all of that being said, one of the more interesting things I've found in Matt's project here with the coralivore butterfly fish is some of the use of like freshwater foods, like rapashi.
Yes, rapashi has been the food because it works really well as a gel food. The basic premise is to coat a coral skeleton with the food. anyone who's been a fly fisherman understands the concept of match the hatch. So if a trout in a stream are feeding on a particular type of caddisfly during a hatch, that's the thing they're keyed in on. That's the thing they want to eat. And you could put down something that's really tasty or different, and they're going to ignore it because they're keyed in on that one food item. And that's really how I think about corallivores. They're expecting a certain shape, a certain texture, a certain appearance, and they won't try a food that doesn't look like that. It doesn't register with them as food.
Absolutely.
So the solution has been pretty much to coat coral skeletons, whether fake or real, but I've been using real dead coral, with a food. And that's what we did for the harlequin filefish. And when I leveraged rapashi, I found that I could take a coral skeleton, boil it, clean it up, make sure it's nice and sanitary, throw it in the fridge, cool it down, mix up my hot rapashi gel, and just pour it right over those coral skeletons, and then throw it back in the fridge, and all of a sudden I've got a coral head that's coated in food but looks like a coral, and you put that in front of the fish, and most of the time they're going to be curious because it's coral.
Right.
And then they will taste it, and maybe they don't like it at first, but that is one of the secrets. And then it's been really hard to get them off the food once they realize that's the food. I mean, they're really ingrained on that food. But the interesting thing is, like, the baby harlequin filefish had never seen coral, and we'd get them eating pellets and flake food. So we know from larval rearing, that's larval capture that's been done of corallivores in the wild, where they catch them right at settlement, bring them into captivity and rear them. They can rear them on pellet foods. They can get them to eat other foods. So there's a certain point in the fish's life where it's pretty flexible as far as what it can eat. And then it kind of, okay, that's my food, and it's hard to get corallivores to switch. But once you get them to switch, they do fine. So yeah, in rapashi, I've tried a couple other type gel foods. The rapashi food, the spawn and grow, is the one I use. Once they're eating that, you can mix in all sorts of pellets and vary the diet more. So that is my staple diet, and then eventually they don't need the coral skeleton. They recognize the rapashi, and so now I just throw a chunk of rapashi in the tank in a feeder, a pouch feeder, like from Two Little Fishies, and that they just eat out of that. So that's good enough for me. I could probably push them to learn to just eat pellets, but no, it's good food.
Yeah.
It works. I'm not going to change anything.
Absolutely, and that's kind of the funny thing is a lot of people will say, well, that's a freshwater food, that's a saltwater food, and then I think there's more overlap than a lot of people think between the two types of food. I mean, I've seen butterfly fish in my own fish barn eat discus pellets from Sarah. I just on a whim, I was like, let's just see if they eat this. Threw a couple in there, and they went right after it.
I don't know if it's the right food for them.
Right, but it was just right. It was just a curiosity thing, right? Let's just see if they eat this, and they actually did eat the discus pellets, for example. So, there's a lot of things that we should, as breeders, we should try. And maybe that's the one thing, at least they're eating it first, and then you can try to get them to something else. So Matt and I have been to the majority of the MBIs here. So let's talk about the progress that's been made in marine fish aquaculture since the MBI started. I mean, I remember the first MBI was literally how to build a fish room, because none of us knew how to do that at the time. Because a fish room, to a lot of saltwater people, is where you keep your protein skimmer in your sump. So it's definitely, it's progressed quite a bit. So let's talk a little bit give me a little bit of history, Matt, and how we've progressed through aquaculture.
Well, so I don't know if that was the first, I was looking, I couldn't figure out which was the talk I gave at the first. It might have been the marine fish rooms one. But yeah, the marine fish rooms one was the concept of a fish room that all of us freshwater aquarists know is a room full of fish tanks. That's a fish room. Concept of most saltwater people, it's a filtration, a space for my filtration, for my tank. And as a breeder, you need lots of tank space. You're working with clutches and different species. So I went through and had spent a lot of time touring the country. Whenever I go out speaking, hey, if there's someone breeding, I want to see what they're doing. And I had kind of collected a whole, probably 13 or 14 different marine fish breeder fish rooms and put them all in presentation. I still give that talk because it's really mind-opening. And then the interesting part is that information, for the most part, applies to everyone. I mean,
Absolutely.
It's very universal. A drip loop is a drip loop. It doesn't matter whether you're a freshwater aquarist or a saltwater aquarist. Putting your electricity at the ceiling is a good idea, and so a lot of that is applicable, but a lot of marine fish people, especially if they had never had the exposure to the freshwater side of the hobby, that was new to them. That was something different. So that's where that talk came from. Going to the point of how far we've progressed, I don't have numbers exactly, but Tal Sweet and I, being another one of the council members and the founder of the Marine Breeding Initiative, we've been keeping track for several years now, the number of marine fish, ornamental species that have been successfully bred in captivity, which spawned through to a juvenile fish. That's what we use as that definition. And it was in the 150, let's say.
Okay.
We are approaching 400 fish now. So that it might have been at like 110. We're like on the edge of knocking at 400. Maybe this is the year we have 400 species. We have so many. I have to upgrade. I'm giving a talk in a couple weeks, my Marine Breeding 101 talk, one of the first talks I ever gave. And I looked at it recently. There's like entire new species, butterfly fish, tangs, wrasses, anthias, that had not been done 10 years ago.
Absolutely.
I mean, the guy who bred the first anthias is sitting right over there. I mean, that's mind-blowing.
Right.
So yeah, and he was working with the same technology accessible to all the hobbyists. He didn't have any special advantage other than it was at his job, but that's it. So, and that's also kind of what's cool about like coming to a workshop like this is, you know, I'm looking at the table of people sitting out there talking. The guy who reared, let's see, what did he do? Guy who reared maculosus angelfish in a pickle jar. Guy who was just in Sri Lanka studying the aquarium trade in Sri Lanka and its impacts in Sri Lanka. The guy who did the first anthias. Joe has done a couple amazing things in that they're escaping me right now, but I know Joe has some really, he's got an incredible quarantine methodology that came out of the lab that he works in. So many like talented people are sitting here in this room that have fundamentally changed. I mean, Chad Clayton out there with Reed Mariculture, I mean, what that company has done has revolutionized what a hobbyist can do as a marine fish breeder. So that's what's cool about coming to a workshop is we've been all hanging out for 2 days. We're just hanging out and
talking fish, just like any other conference, just talking fish.
But even more so, we're all here for one singular purpose, which is breeding marine fish, and the things that go into that. This isn't a coral conference. We're not all talking about the latest acroporifrag or whatever. This is hardcore folk, but the amount of brain power and experience,
the amount of information, say like, you know, for someone at a hobbyist level, like the amount of information you gain from this is mind blowing. You know, just sit there and just soak it in, right? You go to the presentations, go to dinner, do all the networking, you soak in all that information. It makes you a better fish keeper overall. Even if you're not breeding the fish right now, just whatever. But you know, when it comes time to, you have all of that knowledge. You know where to get the rotifers from. You know how to get the copepods. You know where to find all the information. So it's definitely something to look up. If you look up the MBI site, which I'll put down here in the description, go ahead and check that out. You can check out how to start with clownfish, how to do things like dotty bags, which are generally fairly easy as well. So that being said, I do want to thank Matt for joining me. It's been a long weekend, but I really want to thank him for coming along and joining me here for this interview. So check out Matt with Coral Magazine or with Amazonas. Definitely both very good magazines. Definitely worth reading if you want to subscribe to those. There's links in the description to both the magazines here. With that being said, I do appreciate you guys coming out watching the video. Would appreciate you guys watching at the end for the 2 videos that come up at the end. With that being said, stay fishy, keep on breeding, and we'll catch you on the next episode.